So this is also being recorded. So some of you who are watching this thereafter will hopefully appreciate this for a long time. This conversation is really again about the journey of HR people and where they're headed and how we can help them. So I've got two very knowledgeable guests with me, Susie Martins and Jeff Waldman. I think what I will be basically doing is throwing questions out because the two of you know this subject matter so well. I'm going to partly ask you to sort of fight over the answers, but so we may trip over each other a little bit, but I feel good about being able to sort of navigate us to the finish line. So the first, I guess, segment, well, what I should do really is ask the two of you to introduce yourselves, and maybe you can tell everyone sort of the context of where you're coming from. Susie, why don't you start by telling us about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Roger, and great kickoff. So my name's Susie. My background's basically I worked 15 years in corporate, globally working in functional areas like finance, ops, HR strategy, etc. Then kind of the last like 7 years, I moved over to the tech side. I was chief people for Applyboard and Clearco, and now have my own company. So I work from a fractional perspective, powering up, basically scaling companies. So that's a little bit about me. So I work with a broad range of companies right now across North America and in the Middle East.
Okay. Jeff?
Fantastic. So my background not as impressive as Susie's is. So I've been in HR for 25 years now, and so I started in large organization in all areas of HR, and then morphed over into working more with smaller companies, startups, and tech. And so now I still do advisory, like in the HR world, and I basically advise HR leaders, mostly with a smaller company, but my business pivoted last year, so we primarily work with HR tech companies, actually helping them, boost their brand awareness and get connected to buyers. And so I was just in Las Vegas last week at a fantastic conference, HR tech conference. So spending more of my time there in, not the HR tech world. So yeah.
Got it. Got it. That's an interesting perspective because that industry's certainly been through some interesting changes and waves. So thank you for that background. I think where I want to start here, set the tone of this conversation, is that all of our organizations have HR, hopefully involved in some way, whether it be internal or fractionally. That could be made up of both sort of strategic people as well as real doers, people who are in the trenches every day, putting out the fires. So when you think about that person that's on the team and they're wondering, where do I fit in with this team? Where am I going? Can you sort of talk a little bit about what you sort of understand about that journey on the team, and how does someone maybe have more of a voice or more of an impact on the team? And I'm assuming there's some internal motivation there to want to move up and be recognized in some way for that. Which one of you would like to jump on that first?
So I don't know. I'll start, and then Jeff, you can jump in.
Sure.
I breathe and talk, so we should have Jeff start. But
we'll go back and forth.
But what was I going to say? So, actually, I posted something last week that is one of my favorite quotes from Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett, probably most of you guys know, is like the best investor in history, period, right? And he just said that he's going to step down from Berkshire. And he always likes to give really practical advice on all topics, including talent, right? Like he's maintained this organization over the year with really great top talent and high retention. And he says, hire for three things. The three things are someone who's intelligent, right? But before that, high integrity, intelligent, and then energy, right? So I always say hire, smart, and happy. But integrity being like a non-negotiable. And I think that's the first place to start, no matter if you're in HR or anywhere. You want to have high integrity, like what do you stand for, and like create that good work and always work, with honesty and good intent. And I think like in terms of intelligence, again, you're going into an area that where you have the ability to learn. And the energy, I think, is the most underrated one. So if you want to really go for it in your career and move up, like people love people who have like lots of energy. They're positive. They get stuff done. They're the go-to. They don't complain about stuff, etc. Like this just is the beginning. You know what I mean? In terms of like just how to be successful in your career. And it doesn't matter what level you are. If you come up and tell your boss or like other people like that, hey, I'll do that. Like be the person that gets stuff done and makes things super easy. Like that is like my most basic advice. I can add on later just about HR in particular of what the journeys I've normally seen, but I
Sure.
would love to hear what Jeff has to say too.
Yeah, it's a good start. Go ahead, Jeff.
I totally agree with all of that. I think, sort of, raising a hand, but, but I think the other thing too, for HR, for leaders, like if you're an HR leader or want to be one, I think one thing that I've been advocating for 25 years is the person needs to be really savvy with business. And I think part of the problem is, I think, a lot of my peers didn't come up through business from a background point of view. So they may have taken like an HR program and it's very good technically, but it missed out on connecting the technical HR part to the, about the actual business. It doesn't matter which
Mhm.
industry you're in, right? It can be nonprofit, for profit, it could be tech, it could be financial services. It's really important that, all uh, HR practitioners and leader understand the entire business from front to back. Okay, that's the first
Right.
thing, because if you're a business function, it's really important to be able to translate the things that you do to business outcomes, and that's a really simplistic way of sort of putting it. But I
Mhm.
think that focus on that, then I think you can move up and be really sought after.
What do you think would be some practical examples of how someone could, because I think that part of that challenge is they're so bogged down in their day-to-day work that it's sort of like, oh yeah, I definitely have to understand more of what finance is doing, or I need to understand the CEO's strategic game plan. Um, what can someone do really to make sure that they're building that acumen? And it's not necessarily a matter of taking a course. It's being in the weeds, being in those meetings. Any thoughts as to how people can sort of chip away at that acumen
Yeah,
level?
courses are just a waste of time. Sorry.
Yeah.
The best way to learn is if you're on the job, is to actually spend time with the actual leaders of the business function. Okay. I mean,
Hmm.
they're going to give it to you straight, right? And I think that, I mean, if you're starting a new job, so I've worked with so many, different organizations, and the first things that I did is meet with all of the different, business unit heads, and then even
Hmm.
their staff as well. And I really want to understand sort of what they do, what their challenges are, what they're striving towards, their goals. And that's the best way to learn, actually. They'll just show you. And it just,
Hmm.
when you get to ask questions, you're all working towards the same, common objective. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Were you going to mention something, Susie? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add on, I agree with everything Jeff said. And I think you're right. Like people are busy and they're like, how do I build this in? And I always suggest like what gets planned gets done. So basically build it into your schedule. I think start today. Like,
Yeah.
HR is one of these areas where, and one of the things I had in my mind to talk about today is this whole notion of having a seat at the table. And I actually don't like this discussion because like in a way, because it's like you have a seat at the table, you need
Mm.
to use it. And what I've seen in the past is that generally, companies when they start, there's a continuum for HR where basically you bring in people to do HR because you need tactical stuff done. You need to have policies, set up like your employee relations, right? All of the like kind of tactical stuff. So, you come in as the tactical person that does these things,
Hmm.
right? You get people paid, people care about that, the policies, you manage the ER, all of that stuff. And then as time goes on, and especially lately, all of these same people are asked to be in a boardroom to talk about, what's our strategy for, distributed teams or whatever it is, right? That's much more complicated. And you've had zero reps in this space. And then they're like,
Mm.
well, why, like, how am I supposed to know this stuff? Right. And, I always say, like, listen, you would never expect a marketing person to join the organization and not understand how you make money. Right. You wouldn't expect that of any other area. Like, why would HR get a pass? Right. So I think you need to be like where Jeff started in terms of like, you need to know the business, like first. Yesterday, I was
Hmm.
talking to a third-year university student, and she's like, what classes do you suggest that I take? And she's specializing in HR. I was like, finance, number one, understand how businesses make money. I was like, tech. I was like, you should be able to know that marketing so that you understand how, like, sell and do things online. Everything's moving in that space. a strategy class, right? And then on the HR side, like make sure you learn technical skills, right? Like everybody I see in HR is like, oh yeah, I'd like to work in, I don't know, like employee experience, right? But the reality is, you know, the hard skills, like for example, Roger, you bring like in benefits, like the compensation skills, pension, like all of these different specialized areas, they're in a deficit and there's not a lot of people in them. Even payroll, I once had the pleasure of running a big payroll org. You know, that's a place where zero mistakes can be made. No one will accept their being messed up, right? Of all
Right.
things. And it's really technical. They're like accountants basically. And there's not that many people specialize in that area. So if you wanted to really specialize and like have a long run in a technical HR area, that's high in demand. And employer relations. I get asked even now from a fractional perspective, Susie, do you know anybody I can talk to from an employee relations perspective? And that's what a lot of people are looking for when they get into trouble. I always refer them to labor lawyers because not too many people are completely up to date on that stuff, right? But I would say those are a few different things. And one last thought, just for fun, because yesterday I saw this, and the whole idea of, you know, how HR is changing is that we're seeing, and this was predicted a long time ago, but I've never seen it yet until yesterday, is that HR will merge with technology. So this seems like a weird thing, right? But like ultimately, you know, HR is about like the human kind of aspects of work and managing that strategically to get things done. But technology obviously has been advancing very quickly, right? So those are kind of merging together where you have to figure out kind of tech first. How do you get your things done that you do in your organization? And then how does that intertwine with people? And Moderna, if you guys might remember, like from like vaccination days, they are the first company that I know of has merged their HR and IT teams. So
Interesting.
they just
Wow.
announced this, like as far as I know, yesterday I saw at Wall Street Journal, like it is, we're here,
Yeah.
right? How do you get work done? And you know, like HR can't just be thinking they're working in a silo of thinking about, you know, how to get an employee program and, you know, these types of things. Like that's not it. That's not where it's at. It's more like, how do you figure out the problem where there's like everybody reading online, how do I apply to jobs, and then sending, you know, robots to apply to every job on the internet. So we have a pile of 2,000 applications for every job. How do you go through those? Right.
Right. Right.
So like, I don't know. But anyway, so I just went on my monologue.
No, that's good. That's good. What comes to mind for me is so I'm that individual on the team. And I understand it. If you're a team of 30 HR people on the team, it's a little different to get in terms of getting noticed. But when you're on a smaller, more traditional HR team of maybe 3 people, you know, you have to be noticed by taking on, as you said, putting up your hand and say, I'll take that on. It may mean that you have to go learn it. There's a lot of ways to learn it on your own, like you said, Jeff, as opposed to taking a course or sitting with all the people that have done it before. And this is a community, the Thorpe Benefits world is a community of many, many HR people who are happy to talk about what they did, right? So that, I mean, we'll talk about that a little bit later in terms of that networking aspect of HR. But so aside from someone moving completely into a strategic position in HR, it's those tactical roles where you have to prove yourself as being ethical, to be on time with things, and you deliver on those projects. So I guess that goes without saying that people need to prove themselves a little bit in those areas and then to be noticed. But you're not going to be noticed to take on something that's more complicated unless you step up and say, I want to do that, right? Because I guess you've probably seen this where people get sort of pigeonholed, and you're good at managing the data or good at managing the payroll, so keep doing that, right? Well, just because I'm good at it doesn't mean I love it. Ideally, I want to do something that I'm good at and I love, or maybe that if I learn it, it'll be a real benefit to the organization, right? You mentioned some of the areas of HR that are in demand. I'm sure people listening might say, what is there out there right now? Is it very much on the top about technology, learning the technological aspects of HR that would probably, especially in the smaller mid-sized organization, where they might be a little slower to adapt or to adopt those things? Does that make sense that would be a first? And then maybe you could speak to some of the other disciplines that you think people could go after.
Yeah. I think there's really, I guess, maybe three key things, you know, but my point of view. One is analytics. So people analytics, so like data analytics, right? I mean, that is a hot topic right now. As a community, HR has never really been sort of great at that. I mean, we're not data people, typically, but that's changing. And of course, the tools out there are actually making it a lot easier for you. So I think that's the first thing. If you can really go after that niche, that can really open up a lot of doors for you. The second one is more broadly HR tech. And I say that, because as a former like HR leader in tech companies that might have been bootstrapped or, have funding, but, on the resourcing side, we want a bank, right? So we didn't have like endless amounts of cash just to burn. So, and I always believe that to scale HR strategy and operations, technology had to be a huge part of that. And so I've really sort of spent a lot of time in that area. And there are solutions out there. It's a very saturated market, but there are ways to figure out the right sort of HR tech stack going forward, for any organization. So whether you're a small company or large, I think having that understanding of sort of figuring that out and then actually rolling it out, and actually that leads me to the next one is around change management, so transformation. So that's always been a hot topic, like I guess, but like more so now with the explosion of AI, and so the rapid changes that currently occur in businesses, today. I think that the last one is what I call the employee experience design. So now we have, Gen Z, Gen Z plus, like I don't even know what they are anymore, but it just, we have a lot of really young people back in the workforce, and there's multiple generations, and the needs and wants of our generational work groups are so different today. And so how do you, design experiences for different demographics, based on need? Because obviously hybrid models, work from home, well-being is, a huge one. And so how do you figure out the hyper personalization of people today, and then sort of translate that into work? And there are companies that are doing that. And then I'll give a little sort of honorable mention, as I mentioned earlier, business. So, I mean, if you understand business skills, then that's going to help you as well. But I think those are the three key ones that I think are really going to play a huge role going forward from an HR perspective.
I think I attended one of your events, Jeff, where the whole theme was around AI and its use in HR, and I think that was in the fall maybe, and sort of got the feeling that that alone is something that everyone is aware of and sort of chasing in terms of how it gets applied, and then all of a sudden there's a new application, then there's another, and then so if you could become the knowledge expert, or at least the one in charge of keeping up, in terms of where is it going, your team would always know that there's something more to be used, right, for efficiency reasons. I had a conversation just the other day with an HR director level, and sort of they talked also about tech and analytics, and they were quick to recognize that it's okay to use tools to analyze data. And of course, with HRIS systems pumping out tons of data, we also have to clean the data first, make sure it's correct, because we don't want to make assumptions or decisions based on incorrect data. Somebody sort of has to know inside and see it and go, oh, that has to go out or that has to go in. And then you have to learn how to sort it in 100 different ways, right? Be it demographically or otherwise, or team-based or whatever. It used to be that you had to have an Excel skill, and I'm wondering if that still is true. Maybe it still is, because you have to play around with it to some degree beyond just asking AI to do it for you. Talk to me a little bit about how that data management, or that overwhelming amount of data, and we're going to talk about this in our trend session, because we think it is in fact somewhat of a barrier to decision making and to finally getting to a recommendation. Can you relate to that in your world?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on this one.
Okay.
I think I grew up in finance, and then I did HR reporting for quite a while. So that's kind of like, where I started. And what I would say is right now, there's a lot of FOMO, the fear of missing out. on AI, right? So all about
Mhm.
everybody in HR is like, oh yeah, like there's this AI thing, there's this, da, da, da. Okay, listen, like AI has been around for like 10 years. Okay. It's just automation, right? And what you said, Roger, is true. Garbage in, garbage out. So like I think we're starting at the wrong point. The point to start at is what are your goals for the organization? What are the problems to solve and how might you solve them? Right. And some of those solutions might be some fun tool that you want to get, right? But like a lot of your own systems, like if you have something like HiBob, they already have like predictive analytics that are based with AI models built in that will tell you like, hey, like 7 months before someone's going to leave, that it looks like they're going to leave, right? Or like if you look at Workday, Workday has, I think, like 40 to 60% of the US population in it. They have awesome trends in terms of like the workforce and like what's going to happen. And that's free. Like you can go online and Google and find that stuff. Or if you're in Workday, you can always leverage those. So I would say like just to be, focused first on what are the goals of your organization and therefore what are the problems you need to solve, and then what are the different ways that you might solve those problems, and like what technologies do you already have at hand or should you invest in to have more overall like solutions versus trying to just like, I don't know, shoot at stuff. You know what I mean? Like, oh, let's get this one cool thing that looked cool, like let's do that, let's do this other cool thing, you know what I mean? And I think there's a lot of merit of just trying stuff manually. Your whole comment on Excel.
Mm.
My husband and I always joke around about this. They're like, it does not matter how senior we get. It does not. We will always be running an Excel every day. Somehow we'll touch some,
Yeah.
but we learned, and maybe this will change over time and will become archaic, right? Is that, we learned how to add things, do things, sort things. I did that so much, so many reps of that,
Mhm.
understand inputs, what could happen, why you'd get crappy data, what may have went wrong, right? And now a lot of people are starting with, they just get the data. So they don't really know, like having some thoughts around triangulating your data, which means like, how do you check in a couple other places to make sure it makes sense? So you look in like whatever system you have and your CEO says, hey, what's the turnover? And you say 15%. Okay, well, you asked me, Susie, does that seem normal? I was like, well, I could be kind of normal. You know what I mean? I don't know. What was it last month, right? What group
Yeah.
was it? Who left, right? Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you need to kind of like go into the details, right? And a lot of people just will like shoot over, well, the system said, you know what I mean? And that's where, I really encourage everybody who's watching, who's new to reporting and has awesome tools, and is advanced tools, but a lot of them are still new. They're still learning. There's still a lot of mistakes. So you need to get behind the curtain. And from an HR perspective, there's not a lot of metrics that you really need to be good at, right? Like if you look at just basic reporting, how many people work in your company? Okay, you should know that. You should know how
Yeah.
many people left. Like how many people joined, how many people left, and why did they leave? Was it involuntary or voluntary? If you know that stuff and you actually know it in detail, then you are doing awesome. Then you can just figure out like what are the best ways to analyze, predict, work that out better from, who's coming and going and how are, the whole like how to manage people in between is a whole nother piece of analytics.
Can I
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
sort of point on, yeah. So Susie mentioned something about, goals, challenges, and so on. If you think that you're going to be like an absolute expert on like data management and analytics as an HR generalist, as a general leader, that's probably not going to happen,
Mhm.
unless you actually go into it as a specialty, okay? But you don't have to be an expert. The idea, so don't forget the tools. So,
That's true.
Susie mentioned some of them. And by the way, I'm not a Workday fan. So Workday is built on sort of old technology and platform. So just letting you know, the modern technology is much more efficient, customizable, and so on. But this is not a knock against Workday. Well, it kind of is actually. But the point is that these tools today are getting better and better at actually helping you at doing some of the analytical work for you. But
Mhm.
as long as you know the questions to ask and the problems that you're solving for it, right? Because uh, because if you don't know those things, then what are you analyzing? Like just basic
Yeah.
reporting stuff, which is fine, but that's not true analytics. Analytics is about taking data from past, current, and and from multiple sources, and then making sense of it to try to predict something in the future. So that's why it's really important for you to, if you understand not the business side of things, the question tag, the challenges, the strategy, then you can
Mhm.
have the modern tools today to do all of that work for you. The tools are getting better and better. I mean, I was in Vegas last
Right.
week for a major conference, and I was just like overwhelmed by the amount of tools and new platforms out there. And I felt, FOMO, and I'm in the
Mm.
space, right? So,
Yeah. Well, actually, I'd like to, you mentioned the word strategy because it always comes back to that. Once, you come out of the weeds of the data, you have to pull back and understand what we're trying to accomplish as an organization, assuming that that is laid out and that you're clear with it and that it's true. But just in terms of picking tools and software or vendors, I wonder, that's an interesting thought for everyone to hear about is, because it's changing so quickly, and we actually had an experience with this where we were going to adopt a platform, and then we realized not just yet, we're going to pause on that because things are evolving. But at the same time, you do have to jump in and take on these tools because there will be new tools, and you'll need to move off from one and move to another. What do you think is the mindset people should have around choosing these various tools to support them? Because they're very practical, very helpful, but you just obviously have to vet them carefully and determine what fits, and go from there. So, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I actually built my own process around this and trying to figure out the right HR tech stack going forward. And so when I say it's the HR tech stack, that means like all of your tools that have to do with work and people. Now it's getting a little bit
Hmm.
muddy nowadays because work tech. Okay, so what is that? Right? So it's
Work
like
tech.
HR tech. Is it, social collaboration software? Is that part of HR tech? I mean, it's getting a little bit muddy. So now the terms are changing. So it's more work tech. But I think
Hmm.
the important thing is there's a couple factors. One is, the size of your organization. Obviously, you're not going to have budget like a bank does to spend millions and millions. So that's the first thing. So there's the cost factor. The second thing is, really sort of what are your business goals? I mean, if you're looking to actually expand to sort of multiple countries, well, that's going to have a huge impact on the choices that you make. Are you in
Right.
office, hybrid, virtual, solely? There are companies that are solely virtual. So if you're virtual, then you need to have something that can work in a virtual environment, right? What about like integration? So that is a huge one. User experience, right? So obviously, don't want a software that looks like it was built in, 1985, right? With the
Hmm.
Commodore. So, I mean, that is sort of anti-experience, today, unless you are driving that sort of vintage sort of thing, which most companies aren't. So, but I think there are, and then obviously, you know, sorry, dude, there's another one, customer experience. And so it's really important to really drive down on the customer support side of things, because technology will break and things will happen. So how often or how able are you to access customer support so that you can solve your problems and then move on? Roadmap, product roadmap, right? So you want to go with vendors and companies that have really healthy and aggressive roadmap so that the features and functions are always changing. Bamboo
Hmm.
HR went through a period where they had nothing. It was just a platform and they weren't really investing much in the tool. It's a very popular tool, for small businesses. But
Hmm.
I advise again, if you're looking to grow your business, it may not be like the right platform to go with. So those are just some of the things that you need to really look at. Don't start with the
Hmm.
tools. Start with the business for the business strategy, HR strategy, and then challenges as to where you're going. If you're staying in Canada only, maybe you don't
Hmm.
need something so powerful. Maybe you need something that's a
Right.
little bit lighter. If you're going global, that's going to have a huge impact on that as well.
So it pays to talk to someone who's maybe been through the vetting process before. So that advice probably goes a long way, saves people a lot of time and aggravation. Susie, did you have any thoughts on that quickly before we move on to
Yeah.
the next?
Sure. Like from a technology perspective, I would say, again, like what problems are you trying to solve and what do you need to deliver? And I would always encourage to do stuff manually. Like people have asked me even in my in my business, they're like, what tool do you use to track leads? And I was like, Excel.
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't have that sophisticated of a process. I don't need one. Why would I invest in that? You know what I mean? And like in that way, I know how it works, right? So you start a little bit more manual, test, see what you're doing, what you're trying to solve for is always the beginning. In terms of tools that I think, to look at, like something like Humi for the simple, like the Jeff. If you're just in Canada, it's a great solution, right? Like it's cheap and
Hmm.
cheerful. It's like, you come in, it might be your first go at it. I don't really like Bamboo HR. That's a personal thing. But like I find like they don't, like when I used to use it, they didn't have very good field level controls. Yeah. And like, yeah, there weren't very good field level controls. So like when I tried to manage data and you're growing really fast, it didn't serve our company well at the time. Things may have changed, right? In terms of HiBob, like I partner a lot with HiBob. I've implemented HiBob. I think it's a great system. I see it just keep on going. You know what I mean? Like that's going to get up to that upper quadrant of systems that are going to really take a big footprint out of what a Workday used to do traditionally and a lot of the other mid-sized HR systems. An interesting one I saw the other day that maybe, I don't know, Jeff, you know them all, I'm sure, like Work Leap. Like, so Work Leap is in Montreal. So this is kind of interesting. I have a lot of customers right now. The big thing that they're trying to solve when they scale and that they get, all the questions from their founders is how do you solve for like performance management? So it's not such a heavy lift, right? And then how do we become a feedback culture? This is something that comes up all the time, right? So then I had one of the people that I'm working with, she's just like, yeah, I'm trying to figure out like which system I should get. And I stumbled upon WorkLeap I don't know, through osmosis. And I went to something that they ran last week and it was pretty cool. Like actually they have AI built into it. It's really quick. It's easy. And it's basically like, let's say you put in your review of yourself and then your peers put in their reviews, it'll already give the manager a summary of like what the themes are. So that's pretty easy and it kind of helps them get started. And you can actually put in inputs like from a, prompting perspective, like let's say your company follows a certain coaching methodology or a certain style of whatever, you could be like, please like incorporate all these things like in your prompts as you build the AI in the background for a work leap. So I'm just giving you one example. There's probably a million systems like this. I like them. They're Canadian. And what I saw them do is they actually built out with how they were thinking about it in a chat GPT and it's in the system. So you can they give you both options. Like if you want to do it yourself, this is kind of how you could do it, but like this is already built in here with prompts. So just a couple of examples, but yeah, payrolls, the integration piece that Jeff alluded to, that's important, right? Like a HiBob would have more integration. Some of those other systems don't. So, and that's very expensive and can cause a lot of issues. And also payroll is a top of mind as well as benefits, et cetera. Like how do you actually link in and read those all in one spot, whether that's necessary or not, depending on cost. So,
Right.
yeah.
Just make sure that, there's always going to be better tools out there. Always. I tell people, look, once you sort of made your choices, go all in. Like really maximize the features and functions of the tools, that are part of your, system. Okay. Because
that makes total sense.
That,
Yeah. 100%.
Because you're obviously paying for it. So why not maximize it? So don't worry so much about what others are doing. I mean, stay close to what they're doing, but I think it's really important to really focus on really making sure that you are getting as much out of your sort of ecosystem as possible. And I see a lot of workarounds and companies not doing that for various reasons. You're just, wasting money, and you're just, adding to, bureaucracy and red tape and costs and all these types of things. So.
Yeah. The other thing I'll just add to that, and back to a question you had earlier, like about the areas to focus on from an HR perspective. The one area that I would add to that and that speaks to all of this is org design. So org design used to be like, you figure out what the company's goal, like what's the strategy, what are your goals? Okay, so what roles do you need to support those goals? And then who do you put in those roles? That's like your 100 miles an hour version of org design, right? So now org design also is like, if you think about your goals, like what are you delivering? So HR tech isn't about like, when you talk about tech for HR people, like I think we're being really narrow to think about like using a HiBob or something like that. Of course you need that and it'll enable, it'll be awesome from a variety of perspectives, but you should be knowing all the systems that are good. Like, you know what I mean? Like the big tickets, like, like AWS, do you know what that is? Like, you know what I mean? Or do you know, what are the different stacks that are being created from a technology perspective, like with product and engineering teams and all the other areas? Because if you're thinking about org design, again, like I go back to the Moderna example, like technology merging with with the people team, so smart, right? So you can figure out like, how are we actually going to get it done? What are those things we're getting done as an organization? And like, what is the way to weave people and technology together? So it's way bigger than just like the HR tasks being automated. That's obviously we own that, but it's also that wider lens. And that's what we need to think about for the future of work.
Great. We're in the home stretch here, just in the last 9 minutes or so. Maybe where I'd like to go for particular people thinking about, again, back to the journey of their HR career and where they are on the team right now. Can you maybe provide some recommendations or ideas on how people can take advantage of the HR community out there in the effect of even mentorship or even the concept of, I guess this is a bit of a stretch, but you do have a personal brand. And, that obviously is important as you obviously both work independently. But for HR team members, it makes sense that you stand for something and have somewhat of a position on things. Obviously, you have to be careful of how you toe that line in terms of the corporate values and so on. But do you have any thoughts in terms of, people getting out there and learning from others and creating groups and community around themselves? And how does that benefit versus getting a little bit too isolated in your job and not necessarily seeing out what else is going on out there? I'm sure both of you can speak well to this. Jeff, do you want to jump on that one first?
Yeah, this is something that is probably the number one thing for me that has sort of helped me in my career. And I think going back to my own personal story, I mean, I'm hard of hearing I was, always up against challenges and roadblocks like most people have as well. And so I knew that by the way, 25 years ago, there were no communities, Slack, AI, this, that. And so, I mean, everything was very manual and sort of old school. And so I knew that I needed to build, relationships around me, right? I couldn't just go out there sort of alone and just be this little pigeonhole on right? So I really made sure that I wanted people to actually know me for the core values, that I believe in. And so how did I do that? I did that in my very first job when I was an HR generalist, and I sort of raised my hand, for everything. All of the new projects that like nobody wanted to touch, I was like, no, I'll do it, and I wanted to learn and actually jump into it. And so one of the things, one of my core values is taking a risk. I've always been like that, and so taking a risk for me is putting out my hand and not knowing what to do, but I'll figure it out. And so the other thing too is I always wanted to give back to a community. So that's a huge sort of value of mine. And so I was involved with some of the philanthropy type things that are part of work. And of course that, gets me, brownie points, I guess. But the idea is that, and then obviously networking. I always believed that I had to have meetings with people, whether it be just a coffee down the street. I mean, back then, no video, obviously. Now it's really easy. Now today, you've got, Slack communities, online community, little, there are different communities out there that are focused on, HR or some segments of HR that you can join. We're in like a sharing economy. I mean, just look at buying a product, buying, I don't know, clothes or buying a car. There's communities around that share their thoughts on the product. Same thing with, HR as well. And so I think there are many of those things, and I think it's really important to schedule time in your day, like in your week, dedicated, to the. I hear people all the time say, "Well, I'm so busy right now, so I can't do this." I call garbage on that. I said, you always have to make time. And I'll tell you why. I was caught in 3 downsizing in 4 years in a period about 15 years ago. It wasn't my fault. It was just back then it was the financial crisis of, 2008. And if I didn't have my solid personal brand and connections that were always being nurtured, I would have been, I would have been, completely, you know, like, obliterated. I
Yeah.
was starting a family at that time. I had, had young kids, and so people are active on the networking sides when they need something. Don't do that. Okay.
hmm hmm
Um, it always has to be going, because if an organization doesn't need you, they'll let you go tomorrow. And
Yeah.
so you need to be ready. And I think it starts from a place of, sort of knowing your value, going online, start a blog. I did that in 2008, started a video
hmm
series. I mean, if you're good at video, you know, like Amy Davies just popped on. She's actually really good at video. And so I think it's really important that you need to commit time to doing this. So.
Okay. No, that makes sense. It does seem like a lot of effort, right? I mean, we get very comfortable at our home office or not wanting to get out there and go downtown or go somewhere to an event, but you always feel a lot better and a lot more energized once you do these things, right? Once you get there. So that's good advice. We have 3 minutes. Last thing I wanted to ask, I can't resist this, is that how does a person on HR team avoid the politics that come with being in a department. You know, the sort of the who has the favor of the leader or the CEO or the this, you know, I don't, does this exist? I'm assuming it does. And maybe there's kind of some last little bit of advice on how to stay out of that or to also make it work for you. Any last comments on that?
Yeah, I guess I can comment on that. Like, I would say don't engage in that. That's easy. I actually think that's a super easy one. That's your own choice of how you manage yourself and your time. And I say gossip is 100% waste of time. Gossip in an interview process for me is 100% knockout, right? Like, if you can't get through an interview without talking negatively about other people or telling me some sort of gossipy thing, like, this is like, there used to be an expression kind of like big minds discuss ideas, small minds discuss other people, something like this. Someone can correct me in the chat, but like that is really true. And like, if you're focusing your time on politics and that type of stuff, then your brain's used on that instead of more important things like, you know, spending time with other people, like exploring big ideas, you know, meeting with people, as Jeff said, all of that type of stuff. So I would highly encourage you just to focus on the goals and be a positive force at work. All that other stuff is negative, like death spiral. I will tell you, like, even like any of these topics, like if we just to build on what Jeff said, maybe as my final point here is like, Jeff was saying, like, yeah, you need to keep, you know, that networking arm alive. That's easy for me or Jeff. We talk, we get along with people, whatever. And sometimes I'll have calls with people that will say, hey, like, what should I do? I want to network in this. And I was like, listen, like, you should never be networking. You should be only building relationships, and you don't need to be that strategic about it. Like, I don't have a checklist of things I like to do. So generally what I do is just do things I like. So yeah, I like certain things. Like, I like Hacking HR. That's a community you could belong to. I like them, right? I like Enrique, the CEO, and what he stands for. So then I go to that. I like Jeff. I'll go to Jeff's events, and he brings together lots of HR people, right? So I like Jeff, right? And I believe in what he's saying, right on. And then, you know, and then I like Disrupt HR. That's another good one. I just share a couple, you know, like if you want to keep on building your knowledge. And Microsoft Reactor is another one. I love Microsoft Reactor. This is my one of my new favorites in the last kind of 2 years. So you can just go. Like, I have no agenda. I don't go there and say, I'd like to make 10 contacts and do this or sell that or do whatever. That is never my agenda. My agenda is like, they're talking about AI agents 8 months ago. And I just sit there with my eyes open like saucers being like, curated content, amazing. And you just learn the whole time. So anyways, I'll leave you with that. Like, you manage the time you want to, like, however you want to manage it. And if you're engaged in office and try to politics, you will always lose. That is like, it's
probably great advice. Stay away from it altogether. We're at the end of our time. I just want to recognize that we've covered some really good ground here. I think my big takeaways really are that HR people, wherever they are on the team, wherever they are in that journey, career phase, they always have a voice at the table. They need to participate. The growth for them is on them. The learning and the networking and the growth is really on them. You can't expect that it's going to be handed to you, especially more in a more of a hybrid or a remote environment. You really have to make even more of an effort to show yourself and your skills. So some good ideas here about picking a particular area of specialty, getting ahead of the technology, or at least keeping up with it, being that key knowledge base on the team, understanding how to pull data and sort data and move data towards ultimately discussion and recommendation. Lots of great thoughts here. I hope that people who have been listening are, wherever they are on that, and whether they're the leader or all the way at the beginning, hopefully people can take some thoughts out of this and apply it to what they're doing. So thank you so much, Susie. Thank you, Jeff, for your comments today. Really appreciate it. And enjoy the rest of the morning.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having us, Roger. Nice to see you, Jeff.
Welcome.
Bye, everyone. Good luck.
Thank you all. Take care. Bye.